I'd just like to welcome all of you to this presentation of the results of the Centre for Cross-Border Studies' first quarterly survey on the conditions for North-South and East-West cooperation. My name, for those of you who don't know me, is Anthony Suarez, and I'm the Director of the Centre for Cross-Border Studies. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by Ben Rocha, a PhD candidate at Queen's University, supervised by Professor Katie Hayward. And Ben is very kindly a volunteer with the Centre for Cross-Border Studies as one of our research associates, and we're very pleased to have him with us here today. Also in the background, quietly as usual, but very efficiently keeping this virtual boat afloat, is my colleague Mark McClatchy. So before we begin this presentation, could I just ask everybody to use the chat function if you want to just exchange views, highlight any information that you think is relevant, to chat amongst yourselves, please use the chat function. But if you have any questions, I'll be really grateful if you use the Q&A function, if you have any questions that you would wish to direct to Ben or myself in relation to this presentation. This is the first survey, and this survey addresses North, South and East, West cooperation for the first quarter of this year, so from January to March. I just want to tell you that there will be a second survey, obviously, in June, just to alert you to that fact, and also to alert you to the fact that there is going to be a research briefing on the results of this particular survey published today at 12 p.m. Details of that will be sent to you through the chat function. So, pressing on, this quarterly survey is for the Centre for Cross-Border Studies is a vital means of giving us an understanding of how the conditions for North-South cooperation are being maintained since the protocol began its implementation on the 1st of January of this year, and reminding you that that is one of the articles within the protocol guarantees maintaining the necessary conditions for North-South cooperation. But it's also looking at how relations between civic society organisations, local authorities on the island of Ireland are being safeguarded in terms of their relations with their counterparts in Great Britain following the end of the Brexit Transition Period and the beginning of the implementation of the protocol. The information that this survey is providing us is going to be used by the Centre for Cross-Border Studies as we work with other organisations to protect North-South and East-West relations and cooperation. It's a survey that's aimed very specifically at civic society organisations and local authorities due to the fact that the mapping exercise that was undertaken in 2017 by the European Commission and the UK government with assistance from the Irish government and the Northern Ireland Civil Service, a mapping exercise looking at areas of North-South cooperation. It was admitted, or there was a frank admission by both the UK government and the European Commission after that mapping exercise that it didn't necessarily include areas of informal, local and community level cooperation. So we thought it was absolutely vital that in our survey we tried to capture that type of cooperation going forward in order to make sure that it is maintained, it is protected following the implementation of the protocol. So that's one of the reasons that we wanted to do that. But I'm now going to turn to Ben, who is going to go through the main results, an overview of the results from this first quarterly survey. So I'm going to hand over now to Ben. Over to you, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you for so many of you for turning up today. It's really good to see. I think it's very timely to be doing this survey, particularly this week, given it's been an absolute bonanza of survey and polling data on the island of Ireland and Northern Ireland, particularly around Brexit and the protocol. We've had the BBC Spotlight survey this week and another Lucid poll released by Katie Hayward and David Finnemore and the team working at Queen's University Belfast. And so I think it's really good and quite exciting for us to be able to present the results of this survey this week and at this time, because it's a different type of survey. It's based on a different panel. It's sort of using different methods, and it's looking specifically at the civic organisations and their perceptions of Brexit in the protocol, and how the dimensions of North-South and East-West cooperation and collaboration are functioning more recently. And so I think what we present here today adds a different dimension and a new angle on the data we've been seeing this week. So it's really good to be able to present that. Now, sorry, Anthony, if you could just go back 1 second. I'm just going to go through this section in 4 stages, more or less. The first will look at understanding the data. Because of the nature of the sample and the survey we used, it's important to understand how we've assembled the data, how it can be used and how it should be used. Next, I'll briefly discuss the respondents. Because of the anonymous nature of the survey and confidentiality, there's only a brief overview of the response, but I'll discuss what I can. And then we will move into the bulk of the analysis, which focuses on the North-South and East-West dimensions. And each of these sections will be broken down by contact, collaboration, and context. Now, the data was collected via a survey of self-selected response between the 9th and 26th of March 2021. And I think at this point, it's important to bear in mind that this is before the recent unrest we've seen in parts of Northern Ireland. And so the perceptions of those events have not been captured within this survey, and that needs to be borne in mind when we present this analysis. The survey received 80 responses overall, and the data is going to be presented as a percentage of the responses to each question. But for the purposes of clarity and transparency, at the top of each figure, you'll see the absolute number of respondents to each question. So, for example, n equals 80. Now, the responses and perceptions presented here speak only for the respondents who completed the survey. Because it's a self-selected survey, no weighting's been given, it cannot and should not be generalized beyond these respondents. However, the respondents who have responded to this survey and their organizations all have a wealth of inside experience and expertise into kind of lived experience and practice on the ground of cross-border cooperation and collaboration. And so the contributions made through this survey should be given due consideration and credibility with that borne in mind. They come from organizations that have not just started operating after Brexit, but have been around since the 70s and 80s and before that. So we essentially, within this survey, have several hundred years worth of on-the-ground knowledge of cross-border cooperation and collaboration. And so I present the analysis within that spirit. If we look towards the respondents, we asked where their organisation was based geographically in the north or the south of the island. 56% of respondents say their organisation is based in the Republic of Ireland, 38% based in Northern Ireland, and 6% have a presence in both jurisdictions. We also asked what the primary organisational activities were, and the predominant responses are community development. 42% of respondents said that their organisations were involved in some way in community development. Education, and 38% of respondents said that their organisations were involved in educational collaboration cross-border. And cross-border cooperation, which 33% of respondents said that their organisations were involved in cross-border cooperation focused projects. Looking towards the North-South dimension first and North-South contact, since 2016, 43% of respondents say that their organisations have increased the level of contact, with 14% have said that it has increased in the same period. So that's since 2016, over the last 5 years, more or less since Brexit. More specifically, this quarter, 70% of respondents say that their organisations have been involved in meetings with partner organisations in the other jurisdiction on the island. For 61% of respondents, if you could just click on Anthony. Thank you. For 61% of respondents, they report that this level of contact is the same as the previous quarter, and it's decreased for 25% of respondents. So broadly, this paints quite a positive picture in that the majority of respondents are engaged in cross-border contact with a partner organisation in the other jurisdiction on the island. Of these meetings, 73% of respondents reported that their meetings with partner organisations discuss challenges to cross-border cooperation and collaboration to some or a great extent. And the predominant focus of these challenges, perhaps unsurprisingly, is presently around Brexit and COVID. Now, when we turn to North-South collaboration, In the previous 5 years, so again, since 2016, 82% of respondents report that their organizations have been involved in collaborative projects with partner organizations in the other jurisdiction. And 71% of participants report that their organizations are presently involved in cross-border collaborative projects. And these are predominantly focused around education, cross-border cooperation, and peace and reconciliation. Now, if you just click on a second, Anthony, we can see that 65% at present are actively seeking new collaborative projects with partner organizations in the other jurisdiction. So in terms of actual occurring contact and collaboration north-south, the results are relatively promising, I would say. The majority of respondents are actively in contact with and actively collaborating and actively seeking further collaboration with partner organizations in the other jurisdiction on the island. This becomes a little more complicated. The picture gets a little more complicated when we look towards the context underpinning the conditions for cross-border collaboration and cooperation. We asked respondents whether they were in receipt of funding specifically designated for cross-border projects, and only 36% of respondents said that they are in receipt of funding, and the predominant sources are from the Irish government, from the EU, or from the organisation's own core funding. As it stands, no respondent has reported that they are in receipt of funding specifically for cross-border projects from the UK government. Now, looking towards the context, we've asked participants about the political, social, regulatory, and material contexts underpinning cross-border cooperation and collaboration. And we can see here that 60% of respondents believe that the political context for cross-border cooperation and collaboration has deteriorated on the previous quarter. In terms of the social context, the predominant response is that it has remained the same, with 32% of respondents saying it's deteriorated. But as I've mentioned before, this survey was done before the recent scenes unrest, and so that impact has not been captured here. Considering the regulatory context, so the legislation that underpins cooperation and collaboration, 61% of respondents believe that that has deteriorated on the previous quarter. And the material context, so the ability to access the goods and services required for the organisation to function on a cross-border basis, 50% of respondents believe that that has deteriorated on the previous quarter. So while actually occurring contact and collaboration is appearing relatively robust, this is somewhat being undermined by the perception that the contextual factors across the board are deteriorating on the previous quarter. Now, if we move towards the east-west dimension, 62% of respondents have said that they are in regular contact, so more than once a year, with organisations based in Great Britain since 2016. And we also asked which area of Great Britain they're most predominantly in contact with. 50% of respondents say that their primary contact organisation is in England, and 35%, so just over a third, have said that they have contact with all other regions of the UK to the same extent. Perhaps curiously, given its geographic proximity to the island, no respondent said that their primary point of contact was based in Wales, and so that is perhaps warranting some further investigation to find out why there is that lack of direct cooperation between cross-border organisations on the island of Ireland and partners in Wales. Now, since 2016, 64% of respondents say that their organisation's level of contact with their partner organisations in Great Britain have remained the same, and 26% of respondents reported that it has increased in that 5-year period. However, when we look towards this quarter, we can see that only 43% of respondents report having meetings with partner organisations in Great Britain. And for 71% of respondents, this is apparently the same level of contact as the previous quarter, and only a 16% decrease, or a decrease for 16% of respondents, rather. In terms of discussing challenges to cross-border cooperation, east and west, 59% of respondents said that their meetings with partners in Great Britain did not discuss challenges to cooperation and collaboration at all, although again, those that did were primarily focused around Brexit and COVID. So what we're seeing in terms of east-west contact is slightly more concerning, especially when considered to Northwest contact, in that less than half of respondents are kind of actively engaged in regular contact over the previous quarters and more recently with partner organisations in Great Britain. When we look towards East-West collaboration, the picture doesn't really improve much. Over the previous 5 years, 65% of respondents say that their organisation has been involved in collaborative projects with partner organisations in Great Britain. And this is predominantly in education, with 32% of respondents and their organisations are involved in cross-border or have been involved in cross-border collaborative projects in Great Britain or with Great Britain. More recently and currently, only 46% of respondents are actively and presently engaged in cross-border collaborative projects with partner organisations in Great Britain. Again, the predominant area of collaboration is in education. And if we look towards the next section of the slide, we can see that only 30% of respondents say their organisations are actively seeking new collaborative projects East-West. And so what we've got here is, when compared to North-South particularly, the East-West dimension appears to be under some strain in that less than half of respondents say their organisation are presently in contact with partner organisations in Great Britain, and less than a third are actively seeking new collaborative projects with Great Britain. When we look towards the contextual factors, we see a broadly similar picture to the North-South dimension, with 60% of respondents saying that the political context for East-West cooperation is deteriorating on the previous quarter. Again, the predominant response is that the social context is the same as the previous quarter with 41%, but just to remind that this is before the recent scenes unrest, and that is not captured within this survey. When looking towards the regulatory context, a large majority, 64% of respondents, are saying that the legislative underpinnings for East-West cooperation and collaboration are deteriorating on the previous quarter. And 53% of respondents are saying the material context, so the access they need to goods and services in order to engage in their East-West collaborations have deteriorated on the previous quarter. And so kind of taking this in the round, we can see that actual on the ground cooperation and contact North-South is relatively robust, especially compared to East-West. However, the contextual factors, both North-South and East-West, are broadly perceived as deteriorating on the previous quarter. Now, in addition to this quantitative analysis, we've asked respondents to put in their own words their experiences, their perceptions, their attitudes towards the current conditions for cross-border collaboration and cooperation, both North-South and East-West. And we can see here the first quote, that I'm involved in trying to develop 4 different cross-border initiatives, all of which have struggled with a combination of Brexit and COVID. Now, this speaks to the challenges that we've seen in the quantitative analysis that are predominantly focused around Brexit and COVID. Now, obviously, we're hopeful to see the challenges of COVID alleviating somewhat over the future, given the success of the vaccine rollout. However, the Brexit challenges still need very much to be addressed. And the second and third respondents, uncertainty and political brinksmanship is the greatest difficulty. We find that businesses and organisations are willing to work towards finding solutions. However, the political brinksmanship is making it more and more difficult. And this, I would suggest, speaks towards the contextual factors in the perception that the political context is deteriorating in terms of both North-South and East-West collaboration. And it possibly could also be considered in light of the responses from the Queen's survey, and that people were having less and less trust in political actors, but more trust towards business actors, and perhaps that could be read in light of that. Looking to the third response is broadly the same. The impact of the UK withdrawal from the EU has impacted significantly. While access to goods and services will probably be ironed out, the absence of formalised structures to support what were previously informal relationships in context has been overlooked. And so dialogue, information sharing and problem sharing mechanisms are still stuck in the late 1990s. Again, looking back towards the contextual factors, this perhaps speaks to the deterioration in the political context, and particularly the material context, that respondents feel they are unable to access the material goods and services they require in order to be able to sustain their levels of cross-border cooperation and collaboration, both North-South and East-West. We have, with the final response, something possibly more positive, that the governments of Ireland and Scotland have recently signed a new framework for collaboration, perhaps bringing Northern Ireland into this might present an interesting through opportunity for collaboration in higher education and research. But given that the majority, or not the majority, but certainly a predominant response is that cross-border projects, both north-south and east-west, are focused on education, these kind of initiatives to bring in what the civic organisations of Northern Ireland have to offer could be a very interesting way forward in making sure that the cross-border collaboration and cooperation remains robust, both north-south and east-west. So I'm going to sort of just run through a brief conclusion now. So we've seen within this presentation that the level of north-south cross-border contact has increased or remained the same for the majority of respondents' organisations since 2016, and that the majority of respondents are presently engaged in and actively seeking new cross-border collaborative projects north and south. East-west cooperation is perhaps under more pressure and struggling, with less than half of respondents reporting that they've met with a GB-based organisation this quarter, or currently engaged in collaboration with a partner in Great Britain, and less than a third are actively seeking new collaborations with partners in GB. Now, Brexit and COVID are understandably presently considered to be the two biggest obstacles to collaboration, both north-south and east-west. When looking towards the contextual factors underpinning cooperation and collaboration, the political, social, and regulatory and material context, both north-south and east-west, are predominantly seen as deteriorating on the previous quarter. And particularly, respondents are reporting that funding for collaboration, both north-south and east-west, is scarce, particularly from the UK government. That just in summary, the responses to the survey suggest that there's a need to focus on maintaining and encouraging north-south contact and collaboration at its current level, certainly, and urgently developing the conditions for east-west contact and collaboration. Now, I'll just finish up by saying that this is only the first survey for the ad hoc group, and so what we present here is a snapshot of the early days of the post-Brexit landscape. But as we go on and continue with these quarterly surveys, we will gradually be able to paint or understand the broader picture of the trends of these, and hopefully be able to understand where consideration and where resources need to be targeted in order to maintain and improve the conditions for cross-border cooperation across these islands. And I think with that, I'm going to finish up. Thank you very much for your attention today. And as Anthony said, the Q&A and chat function is open, and I'll be here for any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Ben, for that presentation, that summary. And just to remind everyone that has joined us here this morning, that a more detailed analysis and with some more detailed responses will be available later on today at 12 o'clock approximately, when we publish the research briefing that goes alongside this presentation, the research briefing prepared by Ben as well, with some assistance from or some input from me as well. I see here in the chat function some information regarding what is going on between the Ireland and Wales, in terms of the Irish and Welsh governments, in terms of their plans for shaping their cooperation going forward. Obviously, Scotland and Ireland, they published their plans some time ago in terms of cooperation going forward. I think one of the things we need to consider in terms of that collaboration on an east-west basis, in terms of those formal collaborations, is that we're seeing that those actions between Dublin and Cardiff, Dublin and Edinburgh, Northern Ireland and Belfast in particular, it's a question of where does Northern Ireland fit into those particular collaborations, what opportunities are there, what willingness is there in Northern Ireland to be involved in those particular relations. I'm just seeing if there's anybody who has any questions, but please feel free. I want to encourage you to either use the Q&A function, that would be the most helpful way, or otherwise through the chat function, to see if anybody's got any questions to Ben or to myself. But although we are aiming to finish in a few minutes, so but please do feel free to ask any questions you might have. I just want to perhaps then just stress one of the reasons that, in fact, that we wanted to do this survey as well is obviously, in fact, very, very good reason. A lot of attention has been focused in terms of the movement of goods and in terms of trade, and in terms of the protocol. But we were very concerned or very preoccupied that there should be a similar focus in terms of relations between communities, relations between organizations, both north, south and east, west, and kind of really informed by the 1998 Belfast Good Friday Agreement and all three strands of that Good Friday Agreement, which for us, for the Centre for Cross-Border Studies, we always see as encompassing the totality of relations within and across these islands. So I thought it was important to capture that as well. There's a question here coming in asking whether there was any reference to the Shared Island Initiative by respondents. Ben, I was going to answer that myself, but if do you want to?
The short answer is, in terms of the free text response, there wasn't anything that was specifically speaking towards the Shared Island Initiative there.
What I would say on that point is that when people were talking about funding, so there was two things, and Ben kind of highlighted that. It's when we talk about the scarcity of funding, it's more about the scarcity of available funding streams, funding programs that are open, encouraging of cross-border cooperation, whether that's on a north-south or on an east-west basis. But what really came out starkly in terms of the responses was, in terms of funding support for cross-border cooperation, Irish government was referred to as a principal source of that type of funding. Obviously, European Union funding programs in support of cross-border cooperation, but there was a real absence in terms of dedicated funding streams from the UK government that, let's say, would be the equivalent to the Department of Foreign Affairs Reconciliation Fund or to the Shared Island Initiative. That was one of the things that came out from the response. In the chat function, we've considered doing a paper on suggestions for the governments involved in order to help realise what's needed to support these organisations. Yes, absolutely. We do think that there's, in fact, there is a paper to be published shortly by the Centre for Cross-Border Studies, which is, and it's actually by a colleague of Ben's, by John McStravick, with some input from me as well. And it's actually on the UK government has announced a series of new funding programs. One of those is the Community Renewal Fund. So it's a paper looking at the Community Renewal Fund and what will then come shortly, which is the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and perhaps encouraging us to look at opportunities for those funds to be aware of, to coordinate with other funds that are specific to the island of Ireland, let's say, and encouraging north-south cooperation, and perhaps also encouraging east-west cooperation, because one of the things was mentioned is the Peace Plus program that is which is a marvelous, really important contribution in terms of supporting cross-border cooperation going forward. But the Peace Plus program really it aims principally at the island of Ireland and cross-border cooperation on north and south. But we obviously will have lost the Interreg program between Wales and Ireland, and also Scotland. Obviously, the Interreg program we have at the moment, Interreg, is for the Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, and it's looking at how we reproduce those relations, that cooperation going forward. Question here from Eleanor: has Stormont contributing any funding for support? Eleanor, if your question is around funding from the Northern Ireland Executive specifically for cross-border cooperation, north-south or east-west cooperation, there is, as far as I'm aware, there is no specific fund that is dedicated specifically to cross-border cooperation from the Northern Ireland Executive. So a dedicated fund, we're not aware of that. I think that's it in terms of questions coming in.
There's just one that I'll pick up on. It's why I kind of presented the presentation with some caveats at the beginning in terms of being able to make any form of statistical inferences. And in the research briefing, we do break down the respondents by whether they're based in the Republic of Ireland or Northern Ireland. And again, that comes with the caveats around trying to make any inferences from small samples. But Anthony will be able to develop on this in that the universe of cross-border civic organizations is a small one, and so we are never going to have a large sample for this survey.
Yeah, absolutely. This survey, when we publicised it, we were really trying to capture those organisations who are involved in North-South and or East-West cooperation. So it wasn't necessarily a survey that was open to everybody, to every civic society organisation on the island of Ireland. It really was trying to capture those who were already involved or have a history of being involved in North-South and or East-West cooperation, to really try and get a sense of how things might be changing for them. In fact, they might not be changing, or if they are changing, they might actually be improving. It's just to try and track and see where we are in terms of that North-South and East-West cooperation landscape following the implementation of the protocol for Northern Ireland. Look, we've just, one more question. Oh, that's it. I think we've just gone past 11 o'clock. We wanted to keep this fairly brief, and I think we've managed to do that. And I would really like to thank Ben for his presentation today. And just to remind everybody, well, first of all, to thank you all for joining us here today, for looking at these results of this first quarterly survey. I would just like to remind everyone that this is the first one, and we will be doing further surveys, obviously, as the protocol continues in its implementation. I would ask people, though, and this is returning to the earlier comments around the size of the response, which is fairly small, but obviously we hope that the responses will increase in number, although we don't imagine it increasing exponentially, because, as I said, we're really looking for organisations who are involved in North-South and or East-West collaboration. But thank you to Ben, thank you to everybody here. And just to remind you that the written publication that accompanies this survey will be published in about an hour's time, and you will be emailed the details of that. And we hope to see you again at other events or at future presentations in terms of the next quarter's survey of North-South and East-West cooperation. So for now, thank you so much to everybody. Thank you, Ben, and thank you to my colleague, Mark, who, as usual, has been running things very efficiently in the background. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, everybody. Stay safe. Hope to see you soon. Goodbye.